Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. In our today's lecture, we will discuss fiscal policy in detail. We will discuss the definition of fiscal policy, and after defining the fiscal policy, we will discuss the objectives of fiscal policy and the role of fiscal policy, the tools of the fiscal policy which are used for the economic stabilization. Let's start the lecture. We know that there is extreme poverty of masses in the developing countries. If we look at some of the Asian countries, most of the Asian countries, and the African countries, we see huge poverty. We see many people in extreme poverty. They are not only poor but also will continue to remain poor if poverty persists. Means if no proper action is taken or no proper measures are taken by the government, then it is possible that they may not only remain poor in the existing conditions, but also they will continue to remain poor in future as well. And the poverty due to in the developing countries, the poverty is due to many reasons like underutilization of existing resources, low capital formation, scarcity of resources, poor labor input, etc. These are a few of the factors which cause poverty in the developing countries because they are not utilizing their existing resources up to the optimum level. They have huge population, but they are not converting their huge population into the human capital. Similarly, due to the low incomes and low saving, there is very low capital formation, which is also an obstacle to the stability, obstacle to the sustained economic growth, which is causing the people poor. Similarly, the developing countries, they have scarcity of resources, and the existing resources need to be utilized in a proper way, in a planned way. Similarly, another cause of the poverty of the masses in the developing countries is, the poor labor input. And the poor labor input, they have the poor labor input because most of the poor is the labor is uneducated, unskilled. They have bulk of general labor, but they have acute scarcity of the skilled labor. So all these are the reasons which are causing the masses poor in the developing countries, especially in the Asia and the Africa. This problem can be overcome by two ways. Number one, effectively utilize the existing resources. One of the way to overcome the problem of poverty and to raise the standard of living of the masses is to utilize the existing resources. And a second way is to extend the available range of resources. The policymakers influence the economy through two main tools. The planning which we have discussed in this, the 2 points which we have discussed in this slide, this can be done through two main tools. There are two ways through which the policymakers intervene in the economy: monetary policy and fiscal policy. We can do fiscal policy. These are the two main tools through which the policymakers can intervene the economy and they can put the economy on track of the development. We know that before 1930s, there was a concept of the laissez-faire economy, and the stock market crash and the Great Depression of 1930s let the policymakers accept the role of government in the economy. You know about the classical theory that before 1930s the classical theory prevailed, and the policymakers before 1930s thought that there should be no intervention of the government in the economy. In the classical theory, there was no role of the government. But after Great Depression and the stock market crash and the Great Depression of 1930s, the policymaker accept the fact that the government should play its role in the economy. So, due to those reasons, the government today formulate and implement policies for taxation and public spending with the aim of impact on economic growth, income distribution, and level of poverty. Nowadays, all the taxation is levied by the government. The government plan the spending through the fiscal budget, through their annual budget, through their ADPs, etc. And the impact, the major aim, the major objective of formulating the tax system and the spending plan is to achieve sustained economic growth and to achieve the equal income distribution and reduce the level of poverty. Since 1990s, the countries of the Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia face historic transitions which motivated them for the role of government in the socio-economic fields. We know that in the Eastern Europe and some of the states, communist states, the condition changed in 1990s, and we see many countries who were colonies of the world powers as independent states, and they also changed their a transition occurred there. They completely changed their economies, their system, which shows the role of the government in the socio-economic fields. The role of state changed, and much more functions were given to the state with the passage of time. So the government there was reorganization in the government spending and sources of revenue. Is with the passage of time, the states are becoming welfare states, and in order to provide more and more facilities to the masses, the government have to spend more and more. Similarly, in order to plan the different developmental projects, in order to extend the infrastructure, the government needs to spend more and more. So in order to finance those spending, in order to finance the spending of the government, expenditure of the government, there should the sources of revenue also were changed, and the governments are sorting for new sources of revenue today, and we see a number of taxes around us, not only in the developing countries but in the developed countries as well. Most East European and Central Asian countries worked for the growth through these measures. They succeeded in bringing about 58 million people from poverty. The East European countries and the Central Asian countries, we see which were established, the Central Asian states which were established after disintegration of the USSR, they worked through the reorganization in the sources of revenue and the spending through in a short through the fiscal policies to bring about 58 million people from poverty. So this means that they were successful in achieving sustained economic growth. We can see here the transition of those states, the primary fiscal balance of the central government from 1960 to 2005. Many of the countries discussed all the European and Central Asian countries. And as shown here, we see the ups and downs, and we see that there were too much ups and downs till 2000s, but beyond that, but in case of the southeastern Europe, we see the little bit different structure. So this shows the ups and downs in the fiscal balance of the government in the different countries and different different states, Turkey, Baltics, the lower income countries, the southeastern Europe, and ECA all. Similarly, we see the public sector spending in the countries, especially in the Eastern Europe and Central Asian countries in 1995 and 2005. We see in some cases control in the government spending, while in most of the in somewhere we have variation in the government spending. This is because each of these countries, some of these which are from Central Asia, like the Armenia, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, etc., while some of the East European countries like Poland, Ukraine, like the Poland, Czech Republic, Slovak, Lithuania, Estonia, etc., these are the countries that they rearranged their expenditures, they replanned their expenditures and the revenue policies in order to keep their economies on the sustained economic growth path. Many studies examined the relationship between public financing policies and economic growth, and contradictory results in case of infrastructure and economic growth relationship were found. Similarly, improvements in infrastructure development enhance economic growth. Therefore, policy development for public spending and revenue are needed. If you want to achieve the sustained economic growth, you will need to have a very good infrastructure, sustained infrastructure, and for a good quality infrastructure, you will have to spend more and more, because infrastructural development need developmental funds, and in order to finance those funds, a country will have to rearrange its revenue. So the revenue generation and the public spending planning are necessary for the infrastructural development, which will ultimately lead to the economic growth. So this chapter, this unit, this lecture is relevant to how the public spending and public revenue can be used to achieve the sustained economic growth. So defining the fiscal policy is attached with the determination of time, type, and procedure to be followed in making revenue and government expenditures. Fiscal policy is actually a policy of the government which is concerned with the revenue and government expenditure. Through the fiscal policy, the government plans how to make appropriate expenditure, how to make a favorable expenditure for the state, and how the revenues can be raised to balance those expenditure. Samuelson defined fiscal policy as fiscal policy is concerned with all those arrangements which are adopted by government to collect the revenue and make expenditures so that economic stability could be attained without inflation and deflation. A very good definition was given by the Samuelson, who says that fiscal policy is all the measures taken by the government to plan its revenue and expenditures such that economic stability is achieved. And this stability, there should be no inflation or deflation, means the price level remained stable. So summarizing the Samuelson definition, the fiscal policy in words of the Samuelson, fiscal policy is all those arrangements, all those measures which are taken by government for planning the revenue and expenditures in order to achieve the economic stability with stable prices. Another definition of the fiscal policy is fiscal policy measures employed by government to stabilize the economy and specifically by manipulating or using the levels and allocation of taxes and government expenditure. Means that fiscal policy is in all the measures taken by the government for the tax collection and government expenditures for the economic stability or to stabilize the economy. According to Lee, fiscal policy considers imposition of taxes, government expenditures, public debt, management of public debt. This is the definition of the Lee, who says that fiscal policy can be defined as a policy which tackles imposition of taxes, the structure of the government expenditure and public debt, and how to manage the public debt, because a good debt is that one which is managed properly. So far, the types of fiscal policy are concerned. We have expansionary fiscal policy and contractionary fiscal policy. The expansionary fiscal policy is used in a recession where we have the falling prices, the low employment, and other economic indicators going down. In such a case, the expansionary fiscal policy is adopted, in which the government takes such some measures, like they increase the government spending and reduce taxes, or take both of the measures. By reduction in the taxes, the purchasing power of the people increases, and demand for goods increases. Similarly, due to the increased spending, the demand for goods increases, which increase which increase the productivity, and with increase in the productivity, the employment increases, and along with it, the other indicators also improves, and till the time the stability is achieved. Such type of policy puts more money into the consumer hands, so they may spend more. This will increase the demand, leading to increased supply and doing well on all economic indicators side. Cut in taxes, increase in production, increase in personal disposable income, and increase in demand. If the taxes are cut, if the taxes are reduced under the expansionary fiscal policies, the personal disposable income of the people increases. Along with it, we can rearrange it that cut in taxes lead to increase in the personal disposable income, and the increase in the personal disposable income lead to increased demand, and the increased demand lead to increased productivity, increased employment, and increase in the income of the people, and till the time the economy comes out of the recession. The second type of the policy is a contractionary fiscal policy, which is used in case of the spending, and in this case, the measures which are taken by the government are to cut the spending and increase the taxes, especially on the income. So what happens that with the cut in the government spending, we can say cut in the government spending and increase in the taxes will lead to, through a channel, reduction in the aggregate demand. We know that inflation can be the inflation is inflation. A major cause of inflation is the excess of aggregate demand or aggregate supply. So, cut in the government spending and increase in the taxes can bring about a balance in it. Dear student, the next subtopic of the fiscal policy is the objectives of fiscal policy. Why fiscal policies are formed, or what is the role of fiscal policy in the economy. So, dear students, most of the countries form their fiscal policies in order to achieve a few objectives, and one of the most important objective is the price level stability. Inflation and deflation both are unwanted in economic circles because inflation is not acceptable for the consumers while deflation is not acceptable for producers. In other words, inflation curbs poor and fixed income group and creates numerous socio-economic problems. So, and deflation will comes as a curse for the producers. So both inflation and deflation are not unwanted conditions in the economic circles. Therefore, the government use fiscal tools like the government expenditure and taxes to control inflation and deflation. Deflation leads to reduced production, unemployment, reduced income, which will lead to the falling prices lead to reduced production, because if the prices are falling, then the producers will not be willing to supply at reduced prices. Therefore, they will reduce the production. With the reduction in the production, there will be unemployment, because not all the people seeking jobs will get the job because of the reduced production. When the unemployment increases, this means that the income of the people increases. Reduced income, the income of income of the people will fall. So these are the drawbacks of the deflation. The government uses different measures. For example, in case of deflation, the government uses reduced taxes, increased government expenditure to curb it, as discussed in the previous slide. Similarly, the second objective of the fiscal policy in countries around the world is raise the level of employment in the economy. One of the major objectives in most of the developing countries is to raise the raise the level of employment in the economy. It is in most of the developing countries, it is a part of the manifesto of the political parties that they will provide the employment. So they can do so by forming appropriate fiscal policies. The developing countries suffer from unemployment, so increased government spending on socio-economic overheads will increase employment and productivity. But care should be taken, as the Phillips say, there exists positive relationship between employment and inflation. The government should design their fiscal policy, their expenditure, and the tax policies in such a way that it may increase the level of employment, but keeping the price level stability. Economic growth and development. One of the objectives of the fiscal policy is to increase to achieve the economic growth and development. The governments are interested in increasing the per capita income in increasing the per capita income. Similarly, government ensures economic growth through variation in the government expenditure and the taxes. We know that the G stands for the government expenditure. So the government brings about variation in the government expenditure and tax level to achieve the objective of the sustained economic growth. Increased government spending, controlled prices, increased production, increase in human capital stock, improvement in the state of technology will lead to economic development. If the government plans its policy in such a way that it may be able to increase its per capita income, its real per capita income, because if the per capita income is increasing and the government has controlled the inflation, the real per capita income will also increase, and the increase in per capita income over a period of time is known as the economic growth. And the economic growth coupled with some structural changes will lead to the economic development. So, in order to achieve the objective of economic growth and development, the government increase the government spending. It control if the government expenditure is increased and the prices are controlled, and which will lead to increase in the production and increase in the human capital stock, improvement in the state of technology. All this can be done through the fiscal measures. It will lead to the economic development, which is one of the core objectives of the economic policies of the states. Redistribution of income. According to Michael Todaro, we are living on a planet on which there are two worlds, the world of rich and the world of poor. It is a very well known quotation of the Michael Todaro that on our planet on the earth there are two worlds, the world of poor and the world of rich. There is too much difference between the rich and poor. In the underdeveloped countries, there is unequal distribution of income, and there are few rich and too much poor. I discussed in the beginning of this lecture that in the developing countries we have extreme poverty. This is due to the unequal distribution of income. And why there is unequal distribution of income, we discussed it in the earlier slides of this lecture. Redistribution in this case is necessary as it will lead to enlarged local markets by adding to the consumers. It will lead to reduced imports by directing resources to the poor. This will increase income and productivity. But this is difficult to adopt in UDCs as the rulers may be feudal lords and dominant wealthy people who will not tax rich easily. The progressive taxation can bring about the equality in the income distribution, but unfortunately in most of the developing countries, the feudal lords and the rich segment of the society are the rulers who are not willing to make the income distribution equal. Effects on consumption. The consumption can be controlled in case of inflation through taxation and government expenditure. Harmful consumption can also be controlled through variation in taxes. One of the objectives of the fiscal policy is to control the consumption in the country. The consumption in case of inflation, if there is inflation in the economy, what the government can do, the government can control the inflation by taking different measures in form of the variation in the taxes and variation in the government expenditure. Similarly, if there are some harmful commodities which the government can control, the government can control such commodities like we can say the wines, the drugs, etc. through a variation in the tax level. Capital formation. Capital formation is another objective of the fiscal policy, one of the basic requisites of economic growth. In UDCs, it is must due to the vicious circle of poverty. We know that the developing countries are prey of the vicious circle of poverty, and the capital formation can can pull out the UDCs from the vicious circle of poverty. If there is balanced growth, the balanced growth will break down the vicious circle of poverty, and the redistribution of income, increased productivity, and stable prices will improve the standard of living and incentive to save and invest in the developing countries, which can be done through the fiscal policy. Removal of deficit in the balance of trade and balance of payment is another very important objective of the fiscal policy, and the government can achieve this objective by variation in the taxes. We know that if the foreign receipts are equal to the foreign payments, if the foreign receipts are greater than foreign payments, we know that the balance of trade is the record of the receipts and payments of visible items only, while the balance of payment is a record of the receipts and payments of the visible and as well as the invisible items. So here we are discussing it in general terms, that if the foreign receipts are greater than foreign payments, we will have surplus in balance of trade and balance of payment. If the foreign receipts are less than the foreign payments, there is means that if we are importing more and exporting less, we will have deficit in the balance of payment. And if the foreign receipts are equal to the foreign payments, we have equilibrium in the balance of payment, or we have balanced trade. This is possible in case our imports and exports of the visible and invisible items are equal. The government can achieve this by variation in the tax policy, in their fiscal policy. Similarly, another objective of the fiscal policy is to encourage the saving and investment, and government can do so through the variation in their tax and government expenditure planning. Tools of fiscal policy the government uses different tools of the fiscal policy in order to achieve the objective of the price level stability, the objective of the economic growth and development, the sustained consumption, investment, saving level. One of the tool is the government expenditure. Government expenditure is the major tool of the fiscal policy through which it controls the economy. The government controls the in case of brings about variation in the government expenditure. In this government expenditure to bring about changes in the price level stability. We know that in case of inflation, the government reduces the government expenditure in order to control the aggregate demand, and while in case of the deflation, the government expenditure is increased to increase the aggregate demand, to encourage the production, and similar measures are taken in different situations to keep the economy on the sustained economic growth path of sustained economic growth. The taxes are also used. Taxes is the second most important segment of tool of the fiscal policy. Through taxes, we know that taxes are major sources of revenue for the government. So in order to finance the planned expenditure, the government raised taxes at the different levels, and government also use the taxes to control to achieve different objectives. For example, in case of the inflation, the taxes are reduced In case of inflation, the taxes are increased to reduce the purchasing power of the people. Similarly, in case of the deflation, in case of the expansionary, in case of inflation, the government, let me repeat that in case of the inflation, government increase the taxes in order to reduce the personal disposable income of the people, to reduce the purchasing power of the people. While in case of the deflation, what the government does, that it reduces taxes in order to increase the purchasing power of the people, thereby increasing the aggregate demand and which lead to improve the different economic indicators. Similarly, deficit financing is used in case of the fiscal deficit. It is also an important tool in order to keep the economy on the balanced path. Transfer payments and subsidies are also used as a tools for bringing about stability in the economy and to achieve the objectives of the fiscal policy. Thank you very much, dear student. Thank you very much. If you have any questions regarding the fiscal policy, you can put questions in the comment section of the YouTube on my YouTube channel. Thank you very much.